So any moment. And good morning. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. We have a very different show today, but I think that it's one that transcends politics. So I really look forward to it. Before I introduce my guest, you know I have my opportunities to get involved. There's lots of ways that you can get out and make a difference in your community. Our first event is September 7th. That is a Wednesday? Tuesday. It's Tuesday.
Tuesday, September 20th.
Oh, spots in the wrong. Okay.
That's okay. Now it's going to really stick in the minds of our listeners.
September 20th.
September 20th.
Let Freedom Ring. That's at 5 p.m. at the Clovis Rodeo Grounds.
It is.
You have a website that you can briefly give?
btcfresno.org. Baker, Thomas, Charlie, Fresno.org.
And we will do that. We will go over that again before it's over and talk about that event. Next event, October 1st, Great American Revival at Bicentennial Park from 11 to 4. October 1st is a Saturday. Numerous speakers. There will be tables. There will be tables that are even teaching kids about the Constitution. Should be a fun day. There'll be food trucks. If you're inclined to meet me, I will be there. My final event, so I'm not doing as many events today. There are a lot more than this. October 15th, that is a Saturday. The Dollar Monthly, which is a Kingsburg local paper, nonprofit paper, is having a fundraiser at the Kingsburg Historical Park. And it is dinner. They have a band. There'll be a raffle, a casino. Really a good time, and it's a USO theme. So should be fun, especially at that historic park. If you get there at 5, there are docent tours. It's a neat little museum. Or not really that little, but a neat museum. There's quite a bit to see. They're encouraging people to show up in uniform. And that's $60, but you get a good dinner and great entertainment. So I hope you make at least one of those 3. Well, my guest of Breaking the Chains, Debra Rush. Welcome.
Thank you, Eric, for having me on today.
So, Debra, why, I heard you speak about a week ago, a little over a week ago, and you talked about how it was almost a calling that you found your place in founding this organization. A little bit of history. It can either be you or the organization, your choice.
So I'll jump into both. Yeah. So in 1999, I found myself impacted by human trafficking. I was pretty violently held captive by a Southwest Fresno gang member because of a drug debt that my mother owed. You can do the math. I had some pretty significant vulnerabilities in my life, and this is something that we're seeing throughout the Central San Joaquin Valley. We are seeing crime-impacted, impoverished neighborhoods that have some really deep systemic issues, and kids are being victimized every day. My story really fit a mold for what we thought was happening with human trafficking, that this was an issue that was happening because people were either putting their children in very vulnerable positions, or people were unfortunately making a decision, maybe out of drug dependency or economic desperation, to make this terrible decision. And what we found out in 2022 is nothing could be further from the truth. To add to this issue, the internet blew human trafficking wide open, and it put it in the living room, the front rooms of each and every one of us. Culturally, I think most of us understand, bipartisan across the board, that we have desensitized our children to sex and violence and made them low-hanging fruit for this really unfortunate and terrible, terrible industry. So from that, I ultimately had a few great people that really made a huge impact in my life at that time. One of them was a rookie Fresno police officer who was on patrol and did what any one of us could do. He simply looked past the person in front of him, seen a child standing there, and started to ask the right questions. And in that, helped provide a pathway for me to find my way out. Another person that was very significant, and someone we probably wouldn't think of in this incident, was a buyer. An individual who came to purchase my body for sex. That individual showed up, and I had been brutally beaten up. I was in a place where I wanted to die. I actually was really looking for like suicide by trafficker. I have a strong religious background and wasn't willing to do the deed myself. And without any regard for what would or what wouldn't happen, shameless plug, I have a book so you can get all the details. I emotionally vomited on this buyer, if you will. And instead of proceeding with what his intent was, he did the exact opposite. And he put me in his vehicle. He took me to a Greyhound station. I was down in Southern California in the Los Angeles area, sat with me for 2 hours, let me hide in the backseat of his car, made sure that I safely got on board that bus and found my way home.
Wow.
And so really understanding that was huge. It really brought me to a place whenever I would, years later, walk into the spaces that I am in today, where I really began to understand that if a kid like me, someone who was articulate, knowledgeable, yes, I had a core vulnerability in my life. Again, like I said, you can kind of do the math on that with my mother being a drug addict. But I really had a lot of resources available to me. I didn't have some of the cliche vulnerabilities that we think about when we think about human trafficking. Could be impacted in this great of a way and not ever really realize that there was a victimization taking place. Then this was information that needed to be spread and needed to be researched. And that's exactly what I did. And the calling just jumped out. You know, somebody needed to do something. And another individual here within our community, someone, Tom Summers, I won't even say someone because he's just an extraordinary businessman within our community, helped navigate and helped provide direction for me to start breaking the chains.
Well, that's impressive. Just listening to that, the first thing that popped in my head was, well, people aren't all just good or bad. They don't fit in neat little boxes. We're messy packages that are imperfect, and we do our best.
Right.
And like your story about the buyer,
right,
that then found his humanity for a moment.
Right. Right. And, you know, actually Breaking the Chains has a really incredible course. It's called our PAR program, Prostitution Abatement Rehabilitation Program, that was handed to us from the Fresno Police Department, that we have now been facilitating for 3 years. And this is where the buyers actually come in for 8 hours on a given day, and they learn about the impact that human trafficking is having on the victims, the community, and what's really happening. And I think that's important, is education is power, right? For our kids that are being victimized, for our community that is trying to figure this whole thing out and figure out how do we get involved, for our police department that's now trying to navigate from this belief system that these were perpetrators and now they understand greatly that these are individuals being victimized, to the buyers who feel like this is a victimless crime. And, you know, I'm meeting a need, I'm giving you some money, so that's helping you meet a need, and the world kind of goes round and round. It seems broken, but in the reality of things, when we look at the context and again, the cultural desensitization, it makes perfect sense for people to be reacting like that. So on all fronts, we are really trying to provide spaces to begin to bring that education. And some of the positive notes is we've seen recidivism drop within the population that we are facilitating amongst the buyers, just by sitting, and we haven't had any women in there, but that's not to say women don't purchase sex for sale, but we haven't had, as of yet, any in our classes. So I'll say the men in our classes, we have seen just a dramatic outpouring of support financially. They're following up with therapists that work with us. You know, obviously for confidentiality, they don't tell us, but all they'll tell us is like, hey, you know, some of the guys have called us, not who, when, or where, and that was never happening before. So it tells us that we're making a difference. And Breaking the Chains is better known as boots on the ground, so we're more like the emergency room for individuals impacted by human trafficking. But being able to really step into that place has been revolutionary to what we're able to do.
So you have to, obviously as a nonprofit, and yet still kind of a social service, but you have to work probably pretty closely with social services. Oh,
absolutely, absolutely. So Breaking the Chains actually just recently took on a pretty huge contract with Fresno County. And so the lion's share of cases that come through Fresno County DSS youth are forwarded over to Breaking the Chains. And it's our advocates and case managers that go out. We work not only with those who have been exploited, which we coined, it's called CSEC, commercially sexually exploited children, but we also are working on prevention services for kids who are at high risk. And so maybe you're out there and you know that, you feel like your kid is at risk, if it's not coming through DSS, we're able to point you back to the Central Valley Justice Coalition and help get those kids the help they need before they end up a victim.
My experience is that government doesn't do anything very well. This is one case where they can partner with a group like yours, and you can be highly effective. What kind of results are you seeing with your program?
Thank you for asking that question. So I'm going to back up to the CSEC population. Again, commercially sexually exploited children, because this is a new term, so we need to get used to it, unfortunately, especially with human trafficking being one of the most significant issues impacting our youth, that and fentanyl. So our CSEC population. We know that group homes are needed right now because we don't have enough space within the foster care system for our children, but we are not a proponent for group homes. So Breaking the Chains does not have a youth group home because it's just not something we want to perpetuate. So what we did was we helped, and we are continuing to build a network of care through foster care agencies and the state to build CSEC families. We launched this program about 1.5 years ago. 9 of our kids have been placed in these CSEC families. And I know this is hard for people to believe, what I'm about to tell you next. And we know this, unfortunately, probably will not continue to be the statistics. But in 1.5 years, and I hope all your listeners are hearing me, all 9 continue to be successful.
Wow.
We have had 0 of those kids AWOL out of those homes. Again, we know that that's not going to be, that's a small number.
No, that having worked with troubled youth for 8 years, that is a phenomenal stat.
Well, and that's, again.
But even if it was 50%, that would be better than most scenarios.
Well, and this is where I think that people, when we start to really understand the impact that human trafficking has, because Breaking the Chains has served, somewhere in the ballpark of over 1,600 clients over the 8 years that we have been an organization. What we have found is that this is such a brutal industry, such a final place along the path of destruction that a lot of these kids and young adults are heading down, that once we are able to provide them a way out, they take hold of it with both hands. This is not, and again, I really want to stress this to people. One of the biggest myths we have is that like alcohol and drug abuse is something that is pre-trafficking, and that's why these individuals get involved. Alcohol and drug use for more than 90% of our clients is post-trafficking.
Now, is that because they're young, or is that?
There's 2 reasons. The average age an individual enters into trafficking, and these are national statistics, is between 12 and 16 years old. Okay. So most kids have not gotten addicted to any kind of hardcore drugs. They may have tried something, tried some weed at school, and I'm not minimizing that, but they haven't, started to actively become dependent on narcotics. What we do know is that once you walk into that at whatever age, and I'm telling you as a survivor, it is almost impossible to not use some sort of a substance as a coping mechanism. We are just not emotionally adaptive to being able to engage in that kind of activity, rapes repeatedly all day long. And I know, again, we're not talking about someone choking someone and slamming up against the wall, but that's pretty common as well. But that activity alone and in and of itself, even if we take out all the other violent factors, is just not something that most people are capable of doing. So people are getting on pills, which again, we know is a whole epidemic because, they're prescribed. It's fine. I can take Xanax. People are coping with alcohol, and then some of your more heavier narcotics, like, again, street level fentanyl and heroin and methamphetamine and cocaine, these type of things. So that's really important for people to understand. If the root issue is not dependence, it is so much easier to break that cycle because, again, we bring them into a place where they can start over. So
you're saying the foundation of the problem isn't with drugs and alcohol.
Right.
They're just what happens either as a way for them to self-medicate or maybe for their captors to enslave them, depending on what drug.
Yeah, no, I totally, that definitely is a possibility. But more than anything, it's a coping ability. It's just a way to cope with that lifestyle. It's a way to anesthetize. I mean, again, you just cannot walk down that path unless you're a complete psychopath. And I hope I'm not putting anybody in a box because we know that some of our greatest leaders are actually psychopaths, right? So psychopath isn't necessarily a bad thing. But on that psychopath tendency, it's just not likely.
It depends on what level of psychopath.
Right.
Look, all of these strong traits that people have, They're gifts or curses.
Right.
And it depends on how they're applied.
That is funny you said that. I actually had a counselor that told me I had psychopathic tendencies. I agreed, right? Some of our strongest leaders.
Mm-hmm.
But it's understanding that, like, if you don't have this ability, which again is very few and far between, to really separate what's happening from the reality, there has to be a buffer, and that becomes a buffer for so many.
When you talked about your organization, you did something interesting that most of them that I've read about or experienced, faith was a central part. I think it's still a central part with you personally and can be a central part, but you don't push that. Can you talk about that difference in approach?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that as well. Yeah, so Breaking the Chains is a charitable organization and not a faith-based organization, although, as you mentioned, faith is a very central part of my own life and pretty much the lives of most of our employees. We experienced that the level of degradation that these individuals have been involved in and have experienced really puts them in a place for a majority where they don't want anything to do with it. When you've been in a place where you literally have been in the lowest echelons of society, it's hard to understand that there is this good, all-knowing deity that cares about you and wants what's best. And for so many of them, they also feel the shame that we see within the LGBTQ community and so many others, where they feel ostracized. They feel that scarlet letter. And for those church listeners out there, they feel like they are that woman that's about to be stoned, right? And so they don't want anything to do with the church. That was something that was put on my heart. I felt by the Holy Spirit very early on, which didn't make sense. But if we know biblically, nothing that is ever handed out throughout the Bible ever really made much sense. And it was just a very powerful tool for us. So, for example, we have lots of clients, lots. You'd really be shocked how many times we get phone calls from law enforcement agencies and other NGOs and individuals who say, hey, I really want to check out your program. I have a client who's interested. Their first question was, are they faith-based? And that was their first, so that would have been the first barrier. As soon as they would have said faith-based, well, I'm not going to that program. And so they're able to come into our program. And faith-based is an option. So we have Bible studies. We have lots of different mentors, even of other faith. We're really important about that, about meeting people where they're at and not with our expectation of where they should be. And then they are able to navigate through that in a space that is very healthy for them and not necessarily from a space that we feel needs to be pushed upon them. With so many freedoms also being taken away from them, that's just another area where we're able to give that back to them and let them form their own identities and belief systems. And for us, and for me personally, I feel like I'm doing that through the power of Christ. We stay privately funded. So again, another plug is more than 80% of our program is privately funded. And we are very intentional about that because we do not want, and nor do we take monies that block us from being able to openly share faith if faith is inquired of us.
That's an interesting approach. And not when you said that last week and I heard that, I thought, because most of the people I know that have been through programs said that the faith is what got them through. But if you're not even to a point where there's any hope,
right? You're
just, oh my God, maybe there's a little hope here.
Right.
That might be too much to take.
Well, I feel like that's the best representation of Jesus. I'm going to be honest. The Jesus that I know, he didn't walk up to people and say, look, profess who I am and then I'll heal you. Right? He didn't say, let me tell you who I am. He didn't walk up and say, I'm Jesus Christ, the Messiah. What's your name? He walked up to people and said, you're healed. He walked up and just had a drink with them at a well. And he allowed his presence to encapsulate who they were. And then they were drawn to him. That's who we want to be at the end of the day. And success story. We have had, I was doing these numbers for a faith-based event not too long ago. So we had 6 different individuals within the LGBTQ community. 2 of them were transgender males who completely transformed their lives and turned back. And these are individuals that only came to our program because they're like, it's not faith-based, we're going to go. And like scared kittens who have been left underneath a bush, right, and aren't sure about who to come out, they were able to come out in their own time, speak to people in a place that is comfortable for them, and invited faith into their life. And thus, had these transforming moments that really, really changed everything. Another survivor who's been a longtime survivor in my life, I'll leave her unnamed. She is a family member. She was married to a woman when we first helped her get out of the life. And, now she's totally transcended that back into a place that is more comfortable for her, has given her life to Christ. So there's just some really amazing testimony for us. And again, we're not saying or digging on anybody else who is faith-based, because God calls us all to different walks, right? Mm-hmm. Can you imagine what Elijah felt like when he was told to run and outbeat the chariots? He's like, what? Anyways.
So we're going to go ahead and take a break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. So we're still Facebook Live. I would like to go ahead and have you talk a little bit specifically about some of your trauma programs when we come back.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. So the reason we do those weird breaks is because it's both radio and podcast. What's needed for radio is different than the podcast portion. So talk a little bit about what your training programs are, and are they only for people that are in your group, or if there were individuals that needed help, could they participate in some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So Breaking the Chains provides services to all individuals impacted by human trafficking. And we really mean all. So this is males, females, juveniles, and adults. And we even have services for parents and caregivers. So those who may be vicariously traumatized or involved in the individual's life. So Breaking the Chains has an emergency shelter. We have 2 homes, a safe house and a transitional home. We also have a network of care as well within our safe home industry. That's more than 30 homes where we place from Fresno all the way across the nation. So those are some of our most comprehensive and immediate care services. All of those are encompassed, and all of our services are encompassed with the option for comprehensive case management care, which means you have an advocate, a case manager who's there holding your hand, helping you navigate all the different services and resources that are available to you to help people put the pieces of their life back together. In addition to that, we have trainings and workshops that are really extraordinary. Again, so much of what we do is based on education. Maya Angelou, one of my favorite philosophers, said it best. When you know better, you do better. And that's the truth. Change really happened for me, not at the beginning. Shameless plug. You got to go read the book, A Cry of the Heart. You can get it on Amazon. But I was rescued. That should have been the end of the story. That wasn't the end of my story. I ended up encompassed after the trafficking in a drug addiction, a meth addiction for 6 years that led me back out of addiction and economic desperation to self-exploit. Can you believe that? It was 6 years after that when I would catch a felony sentence for stabbing a buyer, and my whole life would change. I'd rededicate my life to Christ and ultimately find my final exit ramp. It's so complex. So what I didn't have in that, and what so many people didn't have, is I couldn't understand all the complex compound traumas that I was experiencing. So Breaking the Chains focuses on that, and we have classes almost every day of the week. And they are all, most, I won't say all, most of them are based in trauma-informed information that is meant to help them understand the traumas they've experienced, coping mechanisms, and kind of how to get to the next level. And then we have another layer of classes that are really more self-help and activity-based. And these self-help and activity, like our survivor-based groups, are parent and caregiver classes. They're really meant to provide a support system and provide opportunities to do something else, to maybe get involved in volunteerism with the SPCA or with some of the other great organizations. Because when you give, you get. You really, really do.
There's a book that I'm going to plug. It's called Who Cares Anyway by Arthur C. Brooks. And it talks about charity and who gives, who doesn't give, and how charity tends to not only shift your perspective, and it's more important to the giver than the receiver. That's one incredibly key thing. More important to the giver than the receiver. So by them going and donating their time, these victims of human trafficking donating their time, I think that's actually, it gives them a purpose.
Yes.
It makes them more successful. Whatever their potential best is, it's now more accessible. This book goes on to talk about how it can also make you more economically successful, and argued that our country, because we at such high levels give, are a more successful country. And I thought it was just a really interesting perspective.
Well, it is. It's a spider web, right? It really is. And I think some of us don't realize that. When you look at a spider web is connected at all points. That's what makes it strong.
Mhm.
If there's any give, so if you have a spider web and there is a slight tear in it, the whole web will fall apart. And in that place, we are holding our country together as a structure, just from one hand helping another. I mean, this is the foundation for all really well built civilizations. I mean, from the Aztecs, but again, I'm sure that's a whole nother show that we could get into. So I agree with you 110%. So we definitely feel like getting involved in community, getting involved in certain groups, giving back is really important because you find purpose. You find value in who you are. So
It makes you reevaluate who you are in a lot of ways too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, my experience volunteering at a boys' home, and most people don't know this. I taught yoga for 8 years, taught yoga for a total of 20. No longer do it. Still practice. At some point I may get back to it, but I'm pretty busy. I see it as, I don't get paid for this show. I pay for this show. This is one aspect of my new hobby that I'm volunteering at. And I think that my job from my perspective is trying to educate people and to move them to action to preserve American freedoms.
Right.
The ideas that were written in the Constitution. And there's kind of where I come from.
Right.
And I see those as incredibly important because they allow for this freedom that allows for all this opportunity. There's a reason why the rest of the world is trying their best to get here.
Right. I think that encapsulates exactly who we are, because I say that all the time when we talk about some of our foreign national clients, which I think is important to understand, is that human trafficking is not just a sex-based crime. As a matter of fact, we believe that labor trafficking is even more prevalent, especially here in the Central San Joaquin Valley, but it's less likely to be reported. And one of the things that we talk about is we do have to have boundaries. We have to have all those things. But if you really look at, people are walking miles barefoot, like on days on end, just at the hope that they might touch soil here in the U.S. We do not understand the benefits and privileges and freedoms that we really, really have, and that needs to be protected. Well,
it's even a little scarier than that. A lot of those people can't leave their home and they're sending their children without them.
Right.
Which is a potential, huge problem for exactly like your group.
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
children without parents to watch over them are, I'm sure, easily exploited.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're being brought across the border largely, if it's illegally, by gangs.
Oh, yeah.
And the gangs are already set up to exploit them.
Yeah, no, we see many issues with young adults, a lot of males, that are brought here because they think that if the coyotes bring them here, they're able to get into the labor industry, and then they can create enough money or some sort of foundation so that their family can ultimately come here. And we see this with kids and young adults and older adults. And the issue is that they're brought here for a more nefarious reason. And they never realize that, and they end up in debt bondages that they'll never be able to pay back, and working in conditions that, coming from a third world country or a country that has no boundaries or labor regulations, that seems totally normal for them, especially because they're in the U.S. And it's absolutely not that. So yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms, because I do agree with you. The answer is not opening the borders, right? That does nothing. Then we lose the great country that we do have. But it's definitely does warrant some more conversations, because again, how do we navigate that? Because it's a very sensitive issue.
So you mentioned workshops and programs. If somebody was just interested, can they just drop in? What's the process for somebody that is interested in your group? Do they have to come through social services?
No. Yeah, so a majority of our clients do come through law enforcement, social services, local hospitals, place you would expect. But we also have a large amount of concerned parents that are calling, people who are having troubled youth, who maybe have started to learn more about human trafficking or seeing some red flags. My kids all of a sudden having a lot more clothing, and they have new Jordans and I didn't buy this for them, or there's been a sudden change in the dynamic of their friends, their group of friends, and things like that. So we get a lot of those. And again, on any level, maybe you're just wanting to find out more. Maybe you're wanting direction to get ready to volunteer or get involved. Just call our front line. So anybody, no matter what your interest is at breaking the chains, you can give us a call at 559-492-1566. Again, that's 559-492-1566, or go to btcfresno.org, the acronym for Breaking the Chains, and yeah, find out a little bit more. It really is that simple. We do a really quick assessment over the phone for anybody who is calling for victim services, and then for volunteers and donors, we have a really great team that would love to talk to you, answer any questions that you have, and get you in the right place.
I find myself curious. So what are the signs? How would you determine if somebody that you knew, even if you didn't know them well, what are the signs that potentially they're trafficked?
Another great question. Love these questions. You're really great at this, Eric. By the way, though, I tell people, this is one of my favorite questions to answer, is that we already have the tools. There's not a magic algorithm, and let me explain. Thanks to people like Nancy Reagan, who is most known for I Just Say No, thanks to Stranger Danger, thanks to so many other drug awareness and suicide awareness programs, we all start at the same baseline. And this is not just important for human trafficking, it's important across the board. If you see an individual, first and foremost, that all of a sudden has had some sort of major change, so they are now maybe regressing into isolation, their group dynamic has changed slightly or dramatically. For kids, you're seeing a drop in grades, all these things we've talked about in all those spectrums, right? Those are your first indicators. Then from there, where it starts being more human trafficking specific, and I have to say this, don't feel like you need to be an investigator. If you're having those issues, there's already a reason to get involved, right?
In other words, trust your gut.
Trust your gut, right?
Reach out for help before it gets worse.
Right, because, the issues we have span beyond human trafficking, from suicide to fentanyl to, so many other things. But then some of the things that we look at is we see that most individuals in trafficking right now, because it's all online, will have either multiple phones. So if your kid all of a sudden has a second phone, or you find a ghost phone, and this means, so maybe your child has a phone and you need to be checking regularly. This whole idea that, they deserve their privacy and their identity, and don't get me wrong, find some really safe boundaries in that area, but you need to go into that room and look. Mm-hmm. Trust a kid to be a kid, right? What were you doing at 15? So if you find a second phone, that's a huge indicator of trafficking. That's huge. Traffickers like to make sure that there is another access point, because they've realized that digital footprints lead to prosecution, and they know that we wiretap their phones and that those type of things are being done within law enforcement. So they create a separate phone line that nobody knows exists. The other thing is apps. Check apps. There is this incredible app that I am a huge proponent for. It's called Bark, just like a dog, B-A-R-K. It's a little blue symbol when you pull up, and it has a little dog, and Bark is incredible. It actually will not only track everything that happens on that phone, but it flags everything. Our 13-year-old has Bark, and the other day she told someone on a Google message, because it tracks everything she's typing throughout her, her electronic device, and it said, "Oh my gosh, you're sick with it." And we got this severe alert that came text message to my husband and I, and said that your child might be ill because it picked up sick, right? And so again, I'd rather have 100 wrong to catch the one that is right, because there have been a couple things, nothing like trafficking related, where we're like, that conversation's a little inappropriate for your age and for this person, so you need to stop. So so looking at that, apps on their phones are really, really important, and apps are changing every day, and parents feel a little intimidated by that because they don't always understand all the different internet platforms. So there's a Teens and Technology course offered through Central Valley Justice Coalition. You can call us, we'll direct you over there. But also look at new apps on the phone. And Bark has a setting to where they can't download new apps, because sometimes apps are hidden under like a photo. It says, oh, well, this is a photo app, but it's really a call app, so that they can be contacted. Alarms, really, really important. If you have a child that is sneaking out, we know that a high percentage, and I don't want to put the right number, but I would conservatively say at least 60, but I think it's more like 70 to 80%, to be honest, of kids who are sneaking out in the middle of the night or run away are actively engaging in some sort of exploitation, because that's how they meet the needs of what they're running away for. So really important things to look at.
So not just signs from them. You said when I watched you speak that most kids have been approached.
Oh yes, yes, absolutely. One of the things that we know is in the late '90s there were some pretty startling statistics that said, and this was regarding drug use, that every child in the nation, I don't remember what the age group, I want to say it was like 15, but by 15, every person, or maybe it was like every person in the nation, but anyways, that every person in this predominant age group had either experimented with drugs, would use drugs, is using drugs, or knows somebody using drugs. Everybody.
And was offered drugs. I was at 3 different high schools, and I was offered drugs at every one of them. Only once at the last high school, but multiple times at the other 2.
Well, and that's really significant when you look at 15 years old, and again, I think it was somewhere around that, but that, again, every person has either experimented, currently on drugs, will use drugs, or knows someone, right? That's it. Every person. You could be whoever you are. We are starting to see human trafficking bump up to those statistics, where we now know that most kids 15 and above, individuals 15 and above, have either been approached by a trafficker, will be approached by a trafficker, are being trafficked, or know someone being trafficked. And so it's not as out there as you might think. So most of us think of this cliche, maybe a black male with chains, gold chains, rolling up in a Cadillac, like, hey, girl, get my car. That's not what trafficking looks like across the board. I mean, I'm not going to say there's not areas where that vision of what we
stereotype.
That stereotype, thank you, has occurred, but that's not what we're seeing. These are just normal polo shirt guys walking by, or even girls, because we see a lot of girls recruiting that may walk by in a mall and be like, just smile and be like, I like that dress. They're looking for some sort of interaction. If any of us look on the back end of our kids' social media, no matter what level of parental protection you've put on, there's always access to that unknown messenger's mailbox, right? And you can look on the back end of Facebook and so many others, and there's all these attempts to be like, oh, I love your profile picture, or great smile. And these are phishing tactics. And we're seeing this across the board, not just 15, 16, we're seeing it on 35-year-old women's social media.
I'm 53 and I get it on Facebook.
It's insane. It absolutely is. And so, again, it's not to say that every one of those messages are traffickers. Obviously, they usually target kids between the ages of 12 and 25 years old is the typical target range. But yeah, it's absolutely happening, and it should bother us. I cannot scream enough that human trafficking is the most significant issue, along with fentanyl, impacting our youth. And right now, we cannot get lost in news headlines and other things. We need to ask ourselves, how can we get involved? And Breaking the Chains is a great place to do that.
What role does law enforcement play with you guys?
Oh, the hugest.
Wait, shouldn't we defund them?
You better not. Let me tell you that they are the real heroes. I just actually put something out about the Coffee with the Cop. I mean, we have real life superheroes. We really, really do. I have been humbled and honored to be able to be a part of so many different things that are happening, even specifically within the Fresno Police Department, but Homeland Security, FBI. So much of what we do really rides on them. None of us have guns and bulletproof vests. And unfortunately, I'm not running in and kicking open a door at 2 o'clock in the morning to try and find your child. But I know some guys who will, right? I don't have the ability to wiretap and to follow these people and to take down these massive organizations. But we know some people who do. They sit tirelessly. They are no longer viewing these individuals as perpetrators. I just sat in an op with Kings County. It was on the news, so we can talk about that. And it was really extraordinary. And I've been watching this with Fresno Police Department for quite some time. But they're new to this in Kings County. And it was really extraordinary to watch them navigate, between the pedophiles that they were arresting and the victims they were rescuing. It's beautiful. It really, really is. And so, yeah. This can't happen without law enforcement, so any defunding of the police is just ridiculously retarded. I'm sorry, I don't know what else to say.
My take has always been, of course, there's a few bad cops. They're in the vast minority, and
yeah,
I challenge you, if you get 100 people together of any divide them however you want.
Right.
Race, age, gender, occupation, divide them however you want. And there's going to be a couple that aren't good.
Well, I mean, look at Breaking the Chains. We have 17 full-time employees. In a couple weeks, you can all applaud silently. We'll have 19 full-time employees. But I've had to fire a handful of people. Now, maybe not for some of the more nefarious things, but there have been a couple that I'm like, yeah, you're not a good apple. Your intentions are wrong, and not necessarily on a trafficking level, but you find people who do not have the heart to serve within that capacity, right? They don't have a victim-centered approach. And so that's going to be just like you said in radio. Like, I love what you said. It doesn't matter. You're going to have a-holes, and we need to weed them out.
Yes, we do.
We don't stop listening to the radio. I hope they don't shut down Breaking the Chains. You know, we do. You talk to me and I fire them. Like, we get rid of that. Like, we hold people accountable.
We're going to go ahead and take our last break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. I want to say thank you to all those people that are watching on social media. You know, if you like and you subscribe, my message gets spread farther. And I think this one is as important as politics are to me. I think that this one also speaks to my heart. This speaks to our basic humanity. So, you know, if you can send this to a friend and get this message out, it's an important thing. Let's go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. We're down to about 8.5 minutes. And so I want you to go over your event, and then I want to end with hope and solutions.
Right.
So let's go ahead and talk about your event on the 20th, not the 7th, the 20th, which is a Tuesday night.
Yes, the Let Freedom Ring event. Super excited. As you said before the break, you know, law enforcement is so huge to what we do. And so this event has two purposes. I will not hide the fact that definitely we need funds. Breaking the Chains is privately funded. So being able to host an event that brings in those critical funding is really important to what we do. But more importantly, we wanted a space to honor those who don't always get the honor that they deserve. And that's our heroes who are fighting the back lines. The law enforcement, like the Fresno Police Department, Clovis Police Department, Homeland Security, FBI, our rural communities that we partner with, like Parlier and Reedley and Sanger and so many others. Our prosecutors, like we don't always think about probation, and our Fresno County District Attorney's Office and Madera County, and all these different individuals who are working quietly on the back end to make sure that our communities and our children are safe. And most importantly to us, they are focused on human trafficking. They understand the impact it's having in our community, and they are making a change. So really making sure that they are highlighted. It's going to be a great event. You can come out and meet SWAT, see a lot of the different, instruments and cars and whatnot that they use. K9 is out there. Come out and shake hands with Chief Paco Balderrama, Chief Kurt Fleming. So many other community leaders will be there, like Jim Patterson, Nathan Magsick, and just a host of others. And we usually have our mayor at most events. And so just a great opportunity to come out, shake hands with some of these individuals, find out a little bit more about Breaking the Chains. We have an incredible live auction, you guys. I'm going to tell you, live auction is always my favorite. We want to go on vacation, right? If you want to get up in Skywatch and you want to fly around with some cops and watch some high-speed car chases, these are the only opportunities to do this. And we're going to be auctioning off some options for that. I mean, that's exciting. You want a day with the K9, a day with SWAT, vacations to the coast, to Hawaii, so much going on at a reduced price, and 100% of the proceeds come back to Breaking the Chains. Not to mention, maybe you don't have that kind of money. We have a really incredible silent auction that night. So everything from $20 to get a $100 massage basket on up the line is going to be available. So barbecue from Ma and Pa's, really, really excited about that. And one of my favorite, because I'm a super country girl, 93.7 is out, and they are hosting the event with their DJs. So Chris Curtis is out he's a former sheriff here. Margaret Mims will be honored that night. It's going to be a really, really great and fun event. Dancing, it's going to be great.
Well, and an opportunity, if you care about the direction of our country and the direction specifically of Fresno County, here's a chance to meet the leaders.
Yes.
How do you affect your leaders if you don't know who they are? If they don't know who you are?
Right.
You're just some random person calling because you're mad.
Right.
You'd be much better served to go out and create a bridge.
Correct. Absolutely.
So that they kind of knew who you were, so that when you called, maybe they'd go, oh yeah, this is the guy I met or the gal.
Right. I remember them. Right. I can put a face to the name now.
Mm-hmm. And you're much more likely to actually get the time of day.
Agreed.
Some politicians don't really, if you don't develop a relationship, won't give you the time of day. That's sad, but that is a reality.
Well, then we'll shout out today to our Mayor Dyer, Nathan Magsig, Jim Patterson. You guys have some really great faith-based leaders, and I know that's not all of them. We love Mike Kerbasi. There are so many really great leaders that you can lean into, and the list goes on and on. Our elected District Attorney Lisa Smith-Camp, they will take your calls. They will listen to your heart. They will respond, and they continue to support.
No, I know most of those people fairly well. So we're down to about 4 minutes. Obviously, you wouldn't do this if it wasn't a calling and you weren't hopeful that you could make a real difference. But can you talk a little bit about why you're hopeful and what do you think the solutions to all of these things are?
The first solution is understanding. I keep going back to education. I hope that all the listeners out there really understand that no individual, no child wakes up and says, I want to be a prostitute. As a matter of fact, I wish you could flush that term down the toilet. These are all, no matter the circumstances they're in, human trafficking victims. If they have found themselves in the most degraded of situations where they are making a move because they are a runaway child and they are just making the decision to self-exploit out of economic desperation, there is a tragic, tragic vulnerability present. Nobody wants to be involved in this. Nobody. They may have built these belief systems within their head. They may be telling you. But that is a broken belief system, a facade enabled to help them navigate through what's happening. So very important. So the solution is education and understanding that, and the community making an impact, us having a conversation, us pulling in at the table. The hope is right here at breaking the chains and in the hearts of this entire community. Unfortunately, Fresno has long been a hub for this type of activity, but we have now made a mark. We have been featured on National Geographic. We have received accolades because of the task force that the Fresno Police Department, District Attorney's Office, and NGOs have established here that has received accolades from the White House on down. People call all of us, myself included, and they say, how are you doing what you're doing here? We have sent the message out that traffickers don't even want to traffic children in Fresno County anymore. They actually want to take them out. So we need to continue to be a voice here. We need to continue to make an impact. We need to continue to keep our community safe, and we need to get our heads out of the sand. So hope is at breaking the chains, btcfresno.org. Contact us at 492-1566.
Well, that's pretty exciting. We're down to about 2 minutes. This is a question from a friend of mine.
Okay.
And she has several people that have had issues. She has dealt with the foster care system and has fostered many kids over the years. And she talked about how memories are suppressed as a coping mechanism. You have people that can help deal with that?
Absolutely. So we are connected to more than 37 licensed therapists here in Fresno. And so we do everything from one-on-one therapy, group therapy, EMDR, to really get down into some of these processes. Again, our services are not individualized. They are not cookie cutter. They're very much individualized. We recant that. They are very much individualized. So yes, we partner with dozens of trauma professionals.
Well, that's an important thing. Because a lot of people, I would say that it probably has effects very similar to PTSD.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The majority of our clients, if not all of them, experience some level of PTSD, with the majority experiencing what's known as complex compound PTSD.
Okay. Well, I truly appreciate this service that you're providing the community. I think that individuals stepping up is the American way.
Yes.
That freedom gives us opportunities, but then it also gives us responsibilities. And I truly appreciate the fact that you're taking that responsibility and running with it and trying to make our local community a better place. So any final thoughts? We're down to about 40 seconds.
Thank you so much for shining a light on this important issue. Again, we cannot do what we do without the community support. So please go to btcfresno.org, contact us at 559-492-1566, and find out how you can get involved.
And you can come out to your event That is September 20th. That's Tuesday from, what is the hours on that?
5 p.m.
5 p.m.
Come out. And the event will actually kick off at 6, so there's a little bit of an hour window. So if you're like, I'm off at 5, still come.
Okay, cool. And you'll have a chance to meet everybody?
Yes. I'd love to shake your hand.
And I'll be out there. I'm planning on going, so it should be a great event. I thank you for this time, Deborah.
Thank you.
I think that is basically a wrap. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. One final time for social media, just the website and the phone number.
btcfresno.org or contact us at 559-492-1566.